brother was born, maybe a year or two after that, my mother had a what I would call a psychotic break, or what I've termed a psychotic break, but I've learned it's not necessarily the right thing. But my
Well,
mother,
what did you learn, or what do you know about what happened to your mother?
well, essentially, she was committed to the hospital. In my memory, it seems like she was there just a few days, but I've since learned and seen that she was there more like 2 to 3 weeks. She was diagnosed with schizophrenia. They got her on medication. She came home. She was never herself. She was never the same lady that I grew up with and was raised by. Jimmy and I had two very different childhoods. I had a childhood with a mother who was present, who was there, who helped me. Jimmy had a mother who had had a psychotic break and was never right and was always struggling with that throughout the rest of her life.
Do you know, like, what sort of changes were seen in your mother? What did you see in your mother after that?
She wasn't present any longer. Jimmy and I, as Jimmy got older and we started going to school, and as I went to school, Mom was never up with us to let us off to school like she was with me before that. It was on Jimmy and I to get up, catch the bus, go by ourselves. When we were home on the weekends, Mom often didn't get up till 10, 11 o'clock in the afternoon. I don't know, maybe I don't have the memories, I just don't know. I don't remember my mom drinking, my mom doing that, but afterwards, after her psychotic break, she drank a lot. I can specifically remember going over to the neighbor's house in the morning. The neighbor had a pond, so Jimmy and I would go fish at the pond, and it'd be early morning, and my mother would be drinking with the neighbor that early in the morning. Additionally, my mom had drug abuse issues. She used drugs. I mean, never directly in front of us that I can recall, but I was old enough and aware enough that I knew that that was what was going on. Like I said, Mom always struggled with her mental issues. She would sometimes... I have an aunt who also has schizophrenia, and my grandmother was of the belief that you could wean people off drugs, and she used to try to wean my Aunt Tonette off of drugs. And to that extent, I don't know that I remember her specifically trying to wean Mom off drugs, but Mom had that belief and would sometimes try to wean herself off her psychosis drugs, and that's when it would get even worse. I mean, even under the drugs, she wasn't present and wasn't the same mother that I had remembered from my youth, but whenever she would try to wean herself off the drugs is when, the psychosis would actually come through more so.
How did your father react to these changes in the household?
I was the golden child with my father.
What do you mean by that? How do you mean that?
Dad used to tell me all the time, even in front of Jimmy Ray, just how great I was. Why can't you be more like your brother? Your brother's spectacular. Look at your brother. And conversely, he used to tell Jimmy, pardon my language, Your Honor, but you're a piece of shit. I just wish you would kill yourself. Why don't you go kill yourself like your mother did? Things to that effect.
At what ages, what's the earliest you recall this being said to your brother?
5, 6, 7 years old.
Okay. How did your father react directly to your mother? Like, how was life in the household now?
It was, again, I don't have specific memories before the 5, other than it didn't feel the same. Like I said, I remember growing up in what felt like a very loving household. After that, there was animus. I don't know that animus is the right word. I guess what I can tell is a little anecdote. My father had done something to anger my mother, and so my mother decided that when my father was asleep, she took out duct tape and duct taped his armpits, and so that when my father woke up, he had duct tape. And I can remember him chasing Mom around the house, yelling at her, cursing at her, and I don't remember what happened when he caught her. I assume that's probably something I've suppressed from my memory, but I assume it. I'm not going to get into that. It means I don't know.
Do you recall any physical abuse in the home from your father?
Not that I can specifically talk to. Again, I just don't have that exact
Okay.
memory. I can talk about mom being leery of dad in certain occasions whenever he was angered and not wanting to be near him, but I don't remember ever seeing him actually strike her.
You mentioned that your mother committed suicide.
She did.
Died by virtue of suicide. When was that?
Let's see, I would have been 14, 15 years old, so I was born in 85. I don't know. Is that 2000, 99, 2000? I don't know.
All right.
I have a tattoo, but I can't see it right now, so I couldn't give you the exact date, sorry.
Okay. And Jimmy was, of course, 5 years younger at that time.
Yeah, so he would have been 8, 9 years old probably.
So what happened in the household then? How did your father is raising the two of you, or?
Yes, so after my mother died, Dad was still working. He worked an hour and a half, 2 hours away.
What
so-
did he do?
He worked in a wheel manufacturing company. He ran a machine that cut wheels for vehicles. And so we went to live with my grandma and my grandpa on my paternal side, his mom and dad. That's Jimmy and I. And my grandparents were very strict, older, very strict. We lived in the living room, in essence. We had a little thing of Legos in there that we could play with. We had a TV that we could watch, but we had to keep it so low that my grandfather in the kitchen right next door couldn't hear us playing or listening to the TV, or else he would come yell at us and tell us to keep it down. I was there for a short period of time. Eventually, I have a cousin, Jeff, who's about my age, that I'm good friends with, and his mom, Aunt Mary, and Uncle Roy let me come live with them. Jimmy continued to stay there and live there by himself. I mean, looking back on it, I feel bad about leaving him, but it was an environment I needed to get out of. It's just too tight, too condensing, and he's 5 years younger than me and's got to be quiet. And he was there for what I can recall for months, under those same conditions. Aunt Mary would, when she could, have Jimmy over for dinner and, get him out of the house knowing that situation. But for whatever reason, it wasn't until my dad stopped working that Jimmy actually came and lived with Aunt Mary for a short period of time.
Was there a time when your grandparents and Jimmy went back to live with your father?
Yes.
How did that come about?
So my dad had hypertension issues after my mother's death, and eventually it got bad enough where he could no longer work, and so he went on disability, and then he came back home and lived at the home there in Paris. Right around that same time is when my grandma and grandpa lost their house, and they actually moved into the house with us. So it was my dad, me, my brother Jimmy, and grandma and grandpa Rodgers.
And how long did all of you live together there? Do you recall?
2 to 3. Well, yeah, 2 to 3 years probably, maybe a bit less than that. I joined the service. Jimmy continued to live with Dad and Grandma and Grandpa, but I joined the Army and went off to the service.
How old were you when you joined the Army?
18.
And did there come an event regarding your grandfather?
Yeah, my grandfather passed away when I was in the service, right before I was getting ready to deploy to Iraq.
Okay. And so now Grandma and Jimmy are living with your father.
That's right, yes.
And was there another event then, when you were in the service?
My father died, yes.
Okay, can you tell me what happened and how your father died?
My father ended up going back to work at some point. It was right around the time that I had joined the service, maybe shortly thereafter. His hypertension had got under control, and his old job wouldn't let him come back, so Dad actually went to be a prison guard in Moberly, which is about 30 miles away. And so he'd been back to work, and while I was in Iraq, so it's, I get deployed, my grandfather dies, I went to his funeral. I actually deployed the next morning at 4 a.m. right after his funeral. I'm in Iraq for about a year, and I get a Red Cross message that my father had died. The reason I tell the story about working at the prison, my dad had a friend there who had married a lady from the Philippines. And through that friend and getting to know that lady, my dad got to know that lady's sister who lived in the Philippines. And my father had gone to the Philippines through building that relationship to potentially marry the lady and bring her back home. They had formed a romantic relationship over the internet and via the phone.
Okay. And do you remember what year your father died?
Let's see, it would have had to have been, I joined the service in 03. I was in for 4 years, so 2007.
Okay. So Jimmy would have been 17 years old at the time?
Yeah, 16, 17 years oldish.
And what happened as a result of your father's death?
So I came home, and I got out of the service on a family hardship. So my mom and my dad were both deceased at this point. There was really nobody there to care for Jimmy, and so I got released from the service on a family hardship to care for Jimmy, to the extent that I could, to the best I could.
How old were you then?
22, 23 years old.
Did you know what you were walking into?
I thought I did. I did not. You know, I'm a very goal-oriented, driven person. You know, you set a goal, you check the box off. I think with Jimmy, my big goal was he's going to graduate high school. You know, like I was like, and as far as accomplishing that goal goes, absolutely. You know, he graduated high school. I did what I did, mark it off my box. But that doesn't tell the story at all. I was 22 years old, not equipped to raise a kid who was having emotional struggles. I mean, I was having my own emotional struggles. There's...
Take your time.
You take your time, sir.
There's few things I've done in my life that I regret. Like, I've made mistakes, but few things I regret. One of the biggest things I regret is not having the foresight to know my brother needed more than I could give him at that time.
Did Jimmy have trouble in school?
Yeah, from the time Jimmy was young.
Yeah. What kind of trouble? How would you describe it?
Developmental, emotional. I don't what I can. So Jimmy, unlike me, who had the benefit of a mother and was developmentally advanced whenever I went into school, Jimmy was not. Jimmy was far behind. In fact, they held Jimmy back in first or second grade. In a lot of ways, Jimmy's not dumb. You know, he's not to that extent. He was just developmentally behind. I think part of that led to him being picked on some. You know, like sometimes the quote unquote dumb kid gets picked on. So he got into some fights when he was younger. Got into fights later in life, in school because of that. He was throughout school in special ed classes, you know, from still being behind. And so,
When you say he got in fights, was he bullied or was he an aggressor?
my understanding, again, you know, this is just what the teachers would tell Dad and what Dad would tell me or Mom would tell me, was he was being bullied. He was being picked on and had to stand up for himself. We were always taught to stand up for ourselves.
Okay. Was there a particular event on the date of your father's funeral regarding Jimmy?
Yeah. So my dad liked nice things, expensive things. He had a Corvette, a collector's edition Corvette that like 1 or 500 was made of, and he had a WS6 Trans Am, which was a high-end performance Trans Am, very fast Trans Am. My brother got caught driving 150 miles an hour in that Trans Am, and not stopping for the police as he was driving, you know.
And what happened with that case, that charge?
Eventually, he ended up getting a felony conviction for that charge.
Okay. When you say eventually, was it a delayed sort of case?
It was. So, I, even being the golden child in my high school years, had my own problems. I was what I use kind of anecdotally into sex, drugs, and rock and roll, you know. And I was by all means intelligent enough, and I wanted to be an attorney even at that young age. I had a guidance counselor and a teacher who came to me in my senior year and told me essentially, you know, Jackie, you know, you have all the intelligence in the world to be an attorney if you really want to be. And you think that we don't know what you do in the evenings when you leave this school, but we know. And if you go to college, you're going to get even worse into those things, and you're never even going to make it through college, and you're not going to become an attorney. We would suggest that you join the service, get that guidance, that discipline you'll need to get you through life. One of the smartest decision I've ever made in my life, besides marrying my wife, of course. But it's what made me be able to be an attorney today. I completely agree with them. I would not have made it through given that. Given Jimmy's circumstances and where he was, very much in a place that I was with those things in his youth, and that's kind of how I correlated what he was doing as I was trying to raise him was, oh, I was doing it too, he'll be all right. Well, when he got arrested for the speeding and the potential felony, the judge there in town was willing to work with Jimmy. Our idea being that once Jimmy graduated high school, he would join the service. That service, like it had straightened me up, would help straighten him up, get things going right, you know. Unfortunately, as that went on and the judge was giving him some time, Jimmy continued to deal with his emotional issues through drinking and drugs and things, and the judge just couldn't take it any longer and had to push it up from well, we have associate circuit courts and a circuit courts. Mm-hmm. So if the judge would have dealt with it at associate circuit court, it would have never got up to the circuit court level to be a felony, but finally had to push it up to the circuit court level for a felony conviction.
So that's how he became a convicted felon?
That is how he
that
became
offense.
Yes.
Okay. He did graduate from high school?
He did graduate from high school.
Are you familiar with his offense regarding possession of a firearm that we talked about earlier?
I am.
Okay.
As I was saying earlier, my father liked nice things, including the things he liked were firearms. In fact, he had one gun case that we had these guns there, the Remington Gold Trigger series, because the actual triggers on them were 24 karat gold plated. All of these guns were $1,000 plus. Dad had all 14 or 15 of the collection that just sat in a gun case and had never been fired. Dad had many other guns beyond that too. After Jimmy got his felony conviction record, I actually went with him to his probation officer, his state probation officer, and said, "Hey, these guns are here. What do we need to do about that?" And he essentially said, "Well, as long as they're still in the cases, then it's okay." Turns out that's not the case. That the house got raided, and Jimmy got a felon in possession firearm charge.
Okay. As a big brother, can you describe some characteristics that apply to Jimmy? I mean, have you ever found him to be any sort of leader? So.
I would not say that that's the case. Jimmy is the brother I know is the type of brother that's kind, respectful. He's the type of guy that would, if an old lady were waiting to cross the street, would take her hand and help her walk across the street. He's also the type of person that we were raised, you know, that if you mess with our family, you know, that's very protective of our family. He's also quite gullible, you know. He sees the best in people. When he meets people, he automatically believes in the best in them, and he often believes what people say and takes it at face value, even when all evidence is to the contrary. He still wants to believe the best of them.
Now, Jimmy now has a child, is that right?
He does.
Okay, and tell us her name and how old she is.
Her name is Malayla. We call her Layla. She's right around 2 years old.
Okay. All right, and do you have contact with her?
I do. Yeah, once every handful of months. We've gone up for her birthday parties. Her mother brought her down to our house. We have a nice house on a lake and everything, and she rode the tractor around. We have some acreage and things, and so she rode around the tractor with me and got a big kick out of it.
Jimmy excited to find out he was going to be a father?
Very much so, yes.
Has he met his daughter?
He is not.
Is there anything that you would like to add in support of your brother?
Not that I can think of, no.
Okay. Thank you. No further questions.
Just briefly, Your Honor.
Okay.
You eventually did go to law school, yes.
Yes, I did.
Pepperdine in California,
Yes, ma'am.
and graduated in 2017.
Yes.
And you love your brother very much,
Yes.
and that's clear. I think your father, I think it was like 42 weapons that were seized from law enforcement, wasn't it?
That sounds probably about correct. Yes, ma'am.
And he entered a plea to just one of those weapons. Is that correct? Do you remember?
I remember him pleading. I don't recall the particulars of it.
I know you were talking about how much he would listen to other people. I guess you wish he would have listened to you when you encouraged him to think about the military.
Well, he did, and he was intending to go into the military. However, the felony conviction precluded it.
I don't have anything further. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Your Honor.